Tanium and ServiceNow have taken the inefficiencies out of vulnerability management. See how all that scanning, reporting, patching, and approving is now completely automated. All right, so Saka, if I'm tracking with you so far, what we did was from the Tanium side, we set up the connect jobs to push this data into ServiceNow. On the ServiceNow side, we've seen the data come in. We verified there are rows coming in. We looked at the jobs, made sure that's all good. So now that the data is here, I'm really curious to see what does this light up on the side of ServiceNow?
Right? Like you said, it's one first we want to make sure that every time we run this integration, and we're going to walk through the running process in just a little bit, but when we run this integration, what comes in is considered what we call imported items, right? And so a lot of people get confused between how to tell what actually came in versus what actually was created in ServiceNow versus what was actually pushed out of Tanium. So high level, when you push data from Tanium, which is that connect job that we were talking about earlier, that connect job has rows out and rows in. And rows in is what we pull out from our comply product into the connect job. And that connect job allows us to then push out to ServiceNow. And when it comes to ServiceNow, those are the rows out to ServiceNow. And they should typically match up with the imported items that we see on the screen here. And that could vary depending on your configuration. You might have configuration for just doing deltas. You might have configurations for doing the full load from Tanium to ServiceNow. So these numbers will fluctuate based on what comes in. I have delta set up right now, meaning that I only send CVEs and findings that are actually changed with a number of things that I want to monitor for change. It could be things like the first found date, or it could be the last scan date, or whatever it is. So you can define these settings inside of the connect job that we were talking about earlier, and then that will dictate how many imported items will show up on this row. This is the most important row, right? Because it tells you exactly what came into ServiceNow. Now, as you pivot into seeing what happened after that step, which means that it's either going to import this data as vulnerabilities in ServiceNow, or it's going to update existing vulnerabilities in ServiceNow. And there's a clear distinction between the two processes built into our integration. So when we look up existing vulnerabilities, we will match against existing CVE numbers in the NVD entry table in ServiceNow. And that CVE entry or NVD table that we have, the third-party NVD table, that will be the table where we match and look up any sort of CVE IDs that match with the incoming data.
And just to define those acronyms real quick, most people have heard of CVE for the vulnerabilities, but the NVD is the National Vulnerability Database, right?
Correct, that's right.
All right.
And that is actually a out-of-the-box configuration in ServiceNow as well. Inside of ServiceNow, when you go through the implementation steps, you can actually integrate with the NVD, the National Vulnerability Database, directly with ServiceNow. And that gives you the added benefit of not only importing a library of CVE information into ServiceNow on its own, but it also gives you the opportunity to now take Tanium library information for vulnerabilities into the NVD as well. So like we will augment what the NVD has provided to you with more information about things like affected platforms, affected products, criteria, the proof of the vulnerability existing in your environment. So there's a lot of added benefits that we have added to our solution so that we can complement the NVD as well.
Can we take a look at that data?
Absolutely, yes. So what happens here is the library in ServiceNow is like this, right? So when you integrate with the NVD, you're going to have all kinds of different information. And this is only things that I'm showing here, but you have all kinds of different CVE data, CVSS score, access vectors, exploitables, et cetera, et cetera. And all of this information is coming into ServiceNow from the NVD itself. And a good example is like, for example, if I click this ID of a CVE, this CVE has all the summary information, but it also has details around the actual data we pulled in from the NVD, it may not have everything. It may not have things like exploits and solutions, etc. NVD just sometimes doesn't have a lot of information. So this is where you see Tanium now really providing additional data about the CVE that may be used in decisions across the platform, across remediation workflows that might be relevant when you have a very empty looking CVE overall. So let's look at the Tanium data. You have criteria. You have criteria of proving that if we have any of this criteria that is true or false, we are proving that that's how we test for that CVE existing on a machine. We have things like platforms. This is something that the CVE NVD library just simply doesn't have as a separate attribute that you can leverage to report on. So you might have a process around remediation that actually focuses on all Windows Server 2008 vulnerabilities that are critical, that have to be solved within 7 days. So now you have the ability to actually take platforms and criteria, and we also have products, for example, and sometimes we bring in solutions as long as they're available from our source, and put that all together into workflows that are going to be relevant for your remediation efforts or any sort of insights or reporting capabilities that you're doing today.
So already I can see, yeah, I'm just kind of borrowing what we've learned previously from like the ITAM integration with software and hardware assets. We would bring in software and hardware related data. So here we're bringing in not only the vulnerability data by endpoint, we're also bringing in the vulnerability library behind it so and if it's already there, we're just enriching that data. This is really a good story.
Absolutely. I see a lot of customers with gaps in understanding how they can organize their work better and faster, more automatically, but they're always left with the challenge of data that's just not there from their source of truth, which is typically the NVD, or it could be other sources and scanners. This is where Tanium has the added benefits of any type of information that we can pull in from the environment that we have and be able to complement those decisions and processes that would normally be very difficult to do with empty information in the CVE.
So this is a list of the vulnerabilities. How do I see the endpoints that have those vulnerabilities and their status?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's kind of two integrations that are at play here. Core integrations, right? And this is the ability to bring in endpoint-centric vulnerability data into ServiceNow. So that's one integration, and that's called the vulnerable item integration. So what we were looking at earlier, when we were looking at that vulnerability run of imported items, this integration itself is for the endpoint vulnerability data. And this will be related to an endpoint, a configuration item in ServiceNow. The other integration that we have is called the CVE augmentation integration. So if I type in Tanium and I scroll down to my vulnerability integrations, what I'm going to see here is a couple of different things. I'm going to see CVE augmentation coming in as a separate menu item. This is the one that we were talking about just now with the platforms, products, solutions, and criteria. And this is a separate integration that runs on its own that provides you with those additional data points. So as you open up the list of integrations in ServiceNow, you will actually see 3 entries here. And the CVE augmentation is the NVD integration, and the vulnerable item integration is the endpoint integration.
Does that show up on the regular computer CI that we've looked at before, or is there a separate view to get that data?
Yeah, so the best way to look at data is actually not any of these list views that we're looking at right now in ServiceNow. The best way to look at data is actually from the dashboards of ServiceNow. And ServiceNow has done a great job of making sure that we enable our customers to be able to view what they care about very, very quickly with any scanner, any type of information inside of ServiceNow's vulnerability response tables. So this out-of-the-box dashboard, that's called vulnerability management, this is where we take out-of-the-box reports in ServiceNow, which are these boards inside the dashboard. And we can now take all the context that Tanium is bringing in, whether it's vulnerabilities by model or vulnerabilities by computers or CIs, or a count of all open vulnerabilities by CVE. All of these dashboards are built for you to leverage just out of the box. For software vulnerabilities, you can also do it by vendor, publisher, by impact, the most vulnerable publishers, the most vulnerable CIs. So let's say, for example, if one of your servers here called CMP Win19009 is one of your most critical servers to keep your business functional, and you have 336 open vulnerabilities on it, and it's coming back from this report, then you have a serious problem. You might have a business impact because you haven't patched those vulnerabilities. So all of these are out-of-the-box reports that we can leverage just with ServiceNow.
I like particularly those ones at the top with those big roll-ups, because then you can see, okay, what's the most popular CVE in the environment? What's this most vulnerable CI? That's a really nice roll-up for an executive view there. Yeah, these top two, because I stopped to look at these and I was just thinking, okay, yeah, this makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. So when we look at now that you have this visual analytics and things are running in the background properly, right? When you have those vulnerability runs executing on time every day from Tanium, bringing in imported items, updating items correctly. So, you may see things like me bringing in 114,000 items with 411 and then when you look at the updated, it might be a little bit less, and that's okay. Because what happens here is that there may be new stuff, and that's where new vulnerabilities will be under the new items list. Imported CIs is another big indicator of the type of machines that we found in Tanium that also are imported CIs, meaning that if there's a new set of machines that have recently signed on and are online all of a sudden, we will actually tell you that there are new machines that we found in your environment. And that's why one of the reasons you have a lot more vulnerabilities all of a sudden in your report. And maybe you have new vulnerabilities altogether, but not have new CIs. So there's always this audit that customers want to do and try to explain, what's before and what's after. And this is a great way for administrators to go back and really audit this run table to then get a sense of a trending line of new vulnerabilities, how many are coming on average, how many machines are being discovered that are brand new versus the existing machines. So a couple of pointers for admins is that use this table to really help you understand the overall historical context around how your environment is behaving in ServiceNow.
All right, I got a question. So, in a very logical, practical scenario, I've got a 0-day situation, and the connect jobs from Tanium are running once a day. This schedule here is running once a day. Now I need to know, I can see it in Tanium pretty quickly when I run my compliance scans, what's vulnerable, what's not. But if I want to pull that over to ServiceNow in the event of a 0-day, can I just go manually trigger the connect job in Tanium once those scans are complete and then manually hit execute now over here to make that run as well?
Yeah, absolutely, Ashley. So, if there's a 0-day threat and anything 0-day happening and you want to run an ad hoc scan in ServiceNow and Tanium will be scanning throughout the day regardless. So in the comply product in Tanium, you're going to be able to run that scan. And the ability to deploy that data to ServiceNow in that moment is as simple as clicking run inside of the ServiceNow and the Tanium Connect job that you created earlier. So you remember when we created the comply findings job with our vulnerability types and set the batch sizes to send to ServiceNow. This is exactly where, although this is running on a schedule and it's every 3 or 4 hours or every day for most customers, we can trigger this job anytime we want. And we trigger this job, it's going to actually push the data, create a brand new vulnerability run in that moment, and be able to update all the current vulnerabilities, provide new vulnerabilities, also new machines that may have signed on, and then allow you to now pivot into a SOC lifecycle, which might be very important to kick off almost immediately. And I'll walk you through actually what happens next. So once you've actually created the run and data is coming in, the ability for us to pivot from getting data in during a 0-day event into actual ability to create a security incident, which is what we're going to talk about in the upcoming sessions as well, is we can actually pivot directly from a vulnerability into a full 0-day lifecycle automation using Tanium and ServiceNow. What I mean by that is, here is an example of a vulnerable item. So this is coming from my run. This is an imported item. This is a new insert for the 0-day. And this 0-day threat is open. And it's a high risk score against a computer that's online. But we also know this can also be in many other computers. So what do we do in this situation? We can create a security incident in ServiceNow. And what will happen in this moment is that you will take it from a vulnerability workflow now into a security SOC operations workflow. Through a security incident creation in ServiceNow, the first step that will happen is that against this computer or server, we're going to be able to take that vulnerability and run a series of actions and data enrichment steps. So your SOC teams can actually automatically understand the impact of this vulnerability directly in a security incident. So let's take a look at how Tanium is initiated inside of that environment. And if you look at me scrolling through all the way to the bottom, I'm going to see a lot of different things for the security teams that typically have a manual process around knowing what's running in the environment in terms of processes or who's logged in or any sort of network statistics they need, services that are running. Those are all important decision factors for finding and understanding those malicious processes or services that are running. And with that data, what you also get back are hash values. So hash values can also tell us that there is something in the environment that's confirmed to be malicious. And if it's a process, let's say, for example, putty.exe, and it has a name of putty, but it has a hash value that's malicious. Tanium's in scanning, it's already scanning in your environment for that malicious hash. So what we do in that moment is allow ServiceNow to then take that hash and add it into a observable inside of ServiceNow, which means that Tanium will now have the instructions to go and scan this malicious hash across the network and be able to give you a number of counts where it finds additional hosts that are compromised on the network. Actually, why this is so important is because we deal with customers all the time that pivot from a vulnerability management scenario to a 0-day threat. And as you look into the security incident lifecycle and you now try to put together the mindset of a SOC analyst in that moment, the number of things that go through their head around what they need to do first, what they need to do next, there's a lot that goes on. And if we can even take 10% of that work and automate it for them, so playbooks in that moment of unauthorized access detected or vulnerabilities that are now 0-day threat, and we need to scan the environment automatically. Maybe we need to completely isolate the confirmed infected endpoint in that moment and from the network so it doesn't impact or has any lateral movement across the network. We can do that automatically for the SOC in that moment directly from ServiceNow. And all of that activity, including being able to isolate, quarantine, being able to log into that machine and get file evidence so then you can interrogate that malicious process or executable in your own lab, all of those actions and capabilities are now available in the ServiceNow security incident process and operation.
All right, so I remember in the ITSM integration for help desk, we had a big red button. I see two red buttons. So if I'm looking at this isolate host, I'm thinking that translates to a Tanium quarantine package on the back end. And then live response sounds like the threat response module where you can go out and collect forensic data from the endpoint. Is that what those buttons do?
Exactly that. And we're actually working on a lot more capabilities for this exact integration here. And the live response is actually a host of different things that you can do with Tanium on the Tanium side. So our objective for this year especially is going to be to incorporate more and more functionality out of our threat hunting capabilities and live response capabilities from our Tanium threat response offering which will be embedded into a list of things that you can do through live response in ServiceNow.